Sup guys? The tier 15 version of Rodney meta should be available for everyone to fight today, and in this video I'm going to be discussing various topics related to the fight. First, I guess I should quickly talk about the mechanics of the fight, for those who aren't in the know. Now that I think about it, it doesn't really say in-game what exactly the unique mechanic is. The gist of it is that if 2 airstrikes or battleship salvos are fired off within 1.5 seconds, Rodney becomes untargetable for 4 seconds. If you haven't been paying any attention and were wondering why the same meta fleet you were using before has been doing 0 damage, this is probably why. Other than that, she also has a bunch of clones standing behind her that are near unkillable. Then Rodney deals extra damage and receives less damage for each clone killed. Basically, you want to avoid killing them if possible. Speaking of which, I recently just released a video about rainbow battleships where I said that Bismarck's weaknesses are her heavy armor damage, as well as very rare cases where the black hole could become detrimental, and I think I cursed her because this fight has been pretty much tailored to make her useless. Anyways, you should mostly just forget about the clones, although battleships will aim at them randomly with their volleys past the first, just because that's how they're coded for some reason. Even in campaign, they'll often aim at lower priority targets with volleys past the first. By the way, it's only been 1 day since tier 15 has been out, so there could be some details that I'm currently missing. The fight is definitely unique as it actively forces you to desync your attacks, at least a bit, but in terms of difficulty, I don't think it's too bad. If they really wanted to go demon time, they could have made the Vanguard pressure higher as well, but I haven't been running any proper tanks in my fleets, and they've been working perfectly fine. Comparing it to some of the other recent meta bosses, I'd say the fight is slightly easier than Jinsu meta, but more difficult than Azur and Chkalov meta. The boss has slightly lower HP than usual, but due to the fact that you can't sync all your buffs, and it having relatively high evasion, I personally feel like it's just a tad bit too tanky for a bunch of cool strategies that would otherwise work to work. Seeing big numbers is cool, and we've had a lot of fights recently with multiple enemies that inflated damage numbers by a lot overall, so it does feel a little underwhelming going back to a mostly single target boss, especially with lower max HP, but I'll probably get used to it within a week or so. Now, let's go over some strategies. Both the ones I've tried and ones I haven't but think might have some potential. The first fleet featured Aurora, Shimakaze, and Unzen. I was using this Vanguard for all the lower tiers up to 15, and it was working quite well. Shimakaze and Unzen are the highest damaging Vanguards against a heavy armor boss like this, quite far ahead of the next best, which is probably some other torpedo ship or Hindenburg. Aside from increasing the damage of Unzen and Shimakaze, Aurora also has the perk of being one of the slowest Vanguards in the game at just 19 speed. The lower your Vanguard speed is, the less likely they're gonna zoom off to some extreme corner of the screen and miss their torpedoes. From my experience, when I replaced Aurora with another ship that would on paper bring as much, if not more damage, torpedo hit rates decreased significantly, so the increase that Aurora is giving to the other 2 Vanguards is probably closer to 50% than just the 35% from her skill. If you don't want to use Aurora, you could try replacing her with Hindenburg, Helena, Kazagumo, and I've also seen Chkalov meta being used. You might want to drop Shimakaze in that case though, because your Vanguard speed will end up being too high for torpedoes to hit consistently. For the main fleet, since battleships have trouble consistently hitting their shelling on the boss, Nagato is a great pick as more of a force multiplier who isn't reliant on her own damage to be useful. Every buff she provides to the fleet is extremely potent here, especially her 20% accuracy buff because Rodney has pretty high evasion, and her reload buff which allows Shinano to get off a 4th airstrike and Unzen to get off one last round of torps she otherwise wouldn't be able to. The equipment I used for the main fleet was chosen to desync and also strike when the boss stops moving as much as possible. I will suggest that you watch the battle for yourself and figure out your own timings, as there's a good chance that your fleet tech reload is not the same as mine, so your equipment will need some adjustments to compensate. A couple points of frustration with this fleet is when the Vanguard zooms too far ahead at the beginning of the fight and fire their preloaded torpedoes at the clones. And Haku's first airstrike, which can whiff pretty badly at times as it strikes when Rodney starts moving. The second fleet I uploaded featured Independence. You might have missed it, but I set light carrier reload tech to 0 for timing purposes. Her reload buff allows for the other two carriers to have very similar strike timings as the Nagato fleet, but in total her damage buffs are much weaker than Nagato's. However, Independence herself deals quite a lot more damage than Nagato, which somewhat makes up for the loss of buffs, but not entirely, hence the need for Helena. In the run that I uploaded, she decided to proc 4 times, which ended up slightly overkilling the boss. The most important scans are the two in the middle that go off when Rodney isn't moving and Haku is striking. As long as you get those two, there's a good chance of one-shotting the boss. Between the two fleets I tried, the Aurora one seemed more consistent to me, but I feel like most newer players are more likely to have the ships in the Helena fleet fully raised as opposed to the Aurora fleet. Anyway, these are just my fleets, and I'm making no claims as to whether or not they're optimal. Yes, you can probably find a substitute for every ship I'm using, and I would suggest using them as references rather than copying them directly. I feel that ships like Shimakaze, Aurora, and to a certain extent Independence, are never quite given the credit they deserve elsewhere, so I try to showcase them whenever there's an opportunity to do so. With how unreliable main fleet damage can be in this fight, as well as its heavy armor, it feels like Aurora could actually become one of the best choices for this fight, over the likes of Plymouth and Hindenburg. Now, for the other ship choices that could have potential but I have yet to test. Obviously, Implacable is going to be quite good, as she can set at least herself up and usually help the other main fleet ships a little bit before her slow runs out. Ark Royal and Chkalov can do similar damage themselves, and go for 4 airstrikes unassisted, without sacrificing too much damage by using Saiyuns and Suiseis. If you want to use a battleship, then Musashi would probably work in place of Nagato, but she'll probably do like half the damage she usually does, although it might be still enough in the end. Due to targeting, using more than one battleship will be quite difficult, if not straight up impossible. Also, Victorious seems like she would be usable here, especially since you want to desync, and she has very low reload. Okay, one last thing before I go. I wanted to feature another content creator. Their name is Reikurozuki. I think they're a Chinese player who plays on both the Chinese and Japanese servers. This is their YouTube channel where they post meta fleets, challenge mode, EX mode, and so on. There is no English here, but there are a lot of ideas you can get just from seeing their fleets. They also have a Twitter page where they post a lot of information, albeit in Japanese, both from their own knowledge as well as things sourced from Chinese forums, translated into Japanese. I gotta be careful not to scroll too far down and catch a ban, since you'll never know what Twitter will decide to show you. Here's their setup for Rodney meta, which slightly differs from the one I used. I guess I could also attempt to break down their fleet for you guys, although I might miss some things as it's not my fleet. The first thing that jumps out is going to be Kirov meta. She provides a slight slow as well as debuff for the first round of attacks from the main fleet, which is decent, but I feel like A gear could be an equal or maybe even slightly better option here. They're using Drake gun on Unzen, which is better than the Hindenburg gun at the same enhancement level against heavy, but mine are all plus 10, which is why I use the Hindenburg gun for my Unzen. Their main fleet equipment is also quite different from mine. On Nagato, they're using an HE gun, which I assume is for the burn, as I didn't do much more damage with the Yamato gun anyway. I don't think the gun choice is very important for Nagato in any case, so just use what you have as long as you can desync from your other cooldowns. No need to upgrade the Yamato gun to plus 13 if you haven't done so already, just for this fight. For the carrier loadouts, I went for 4 airstrikes on Shinano and 3 on Haku, whereas they did the opposite. Both ways clearly work, and there are benefits to each. If you make Shinano the faster one, she can get her fully stacked permanent debuff sooner, which benefits your Vanguard more. Also, since the faster carrier can't bring Tenrai, making Haku the slower one allows her to bring Tenrai, which is a bigger part of her damage than it is for Shinano. And lastly, the slower carrier's first strike will happen when Rodney starts moving, and since Haku is less reliant on her torpedo bombers, she's not affected as much by missing them. On the other hand, if you make Haku the faster one, then Shinano will benefit from Haku's lightning debuff on most of her airstrikes, whereas Haku's debuff is permanent and doesn't need to be applied first. Even if you can't understand any of the Japanese content, having more perspectives and references to draw from other communities and keeping an open mind is likely going to be useful to everyone. Anyways, that's it for this video. Good luck finding something that works for you in this fight. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.